Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the Daily Medieval Podcast with me. Now today we are travelling to the 1300s to one of the Italian city-states, to a scholar and poet of early Renaissance Italy who was one of the earliest humanists. This is Francesco Petrarch, a fantastic member of the medieval community who is incredibly important to our understanding of basically what life was like in a very depressing time, because this was during, his life, a big factor of his life was living through the Black Death, which especially hit the city-states bad. We see, I believe it was Siena, go from a population of about 80,000 down to 10,000. So we begin with Petrarch's letters, his familia, as he recalls, and basically he addresses various classical writers, Augustine, Socrates, Cicero especially, in these letters. And one of his most, infamous ones comes from a time where he was kind of contemplating basically life in 1348, so kind of the midst of the Black Death, when just as it was kind of kicking off. I believe that the Black Death hit Italy, so 1347 was when it arrived in Europe. So this is the year after, where suddenly people are beginning to drop like flies across the continent. And so he says, he addresses kind of, an anonymous audience or person. And he says, "What are we doing, brother? Behold, we have already tried everything and no rest is in sight. When can we expect it? Where shall we seek it? Time, as they say, has slipped through our fingers. Our former hopes are buried with our friends. The year 1348 left us alone and helpless. It did not deprive us of things that can be restored by the Indian, Caspian, or Carpathian Sea, but it subjected us to irreparable losses. Whatever death wrought is now an incurable wound. There is only one consolation in all this, that we too shall follow those who preceded us. How long our wait will be, I do not know, but this I do know, that it cannot be long, and however short the wait may be, it cannot be avoided by being burdensome." And so basically it's about this inability to find rest, this kind of anxiety and restlessness during kind of the Black Death, or in the midst of it. And it's not overly complex Latin like that you would find in Cicero, but to understand kind of the Latin and the letters of Petrarch, you do actually have to understand Cicero, because when we look at kind of Petrarch's early life, a lot can be revealed in his kind of contemplation of it, because we see that Petrarch remarks that basically he's endured danger and death from a very young age. He says, as a baby, he was carried around Italy by a young man, and whilst crossing the river Arno, the young man almost drowned, holding him. He says that the burden entrusted to him that was Petrarch. And so then it is pleasing to recall that since the dawn of his birth, he has been plagued by so much danger. His mother, we see, essentially dies in childbirth as well. So from his perspective, he's living in a time where kind of, although there is a lot of love in his life for his friends, which is why he calls the letters familiares, he writes in his familiares 16 that about his style, where it comes from, about his early life with just him and his father. And he says, "You'll excuse me, in your excellence, my style that to some might appear less than respectful, but by God, anything but arrogant. I do not know how to write differently. I have not produced this style in Italy, but merely restored it," speaking of his restoration of classical kind of Latin. When I begin with this in my youth, I was mocked by contemporaries. However, all eagerly outdid each other in following me in this. So again, this connects to his early humanist life. So he speaks in which he becomes acquainted with Cicero. He says, "Since my childhood, when all of the others either open their minds to Prospero or Aesopus, I leant on Cicero's books, either by nature's instigation or by the encouragement of a parent, who is a great admirer of that author." And he says about how, although he may not have kind of understood it at an early age, the words, the way in which the language was, really stimulated him. But he met a certain obstacle from his father, in which he says, "Until my father pushed me to study civil law, that if it pleased him and God, I will learn what is the law of the hired and the borrowed, of wills and codices, of rural estates and towns, and I had forgot Cicero, who describes the healthiest laws of life." So he says about how basically his father pushed him towards law, and that he wasted 7 years in that study. And that although it's laughable, it's also tearful to hear that happened, because basically what ends up happening, as we will see, is that his father kind of really tries to sway him from literacy by doing this. He says, "All the books of Cicero and some of the books of the poets that I had were taken from their places where I had hidden them, and fearing what was about to happen, his father burned the books as if he was a heretic." And he had mourned this, but his father saved a book, 2 books, one of which was Cicero, the rhetoric of Cicero, and handed to them. And so this was kind of a consolation for his support of the civil endeavour. And so although that kind of we know Petrarch by his kind of literacy, his poetic life and everything, he's, I guess, had a really tough one from a young age. And as we can see from his writings, from a very young age, he believes he's cursed. He's, was swayed by his parents. He almost died as a child. His mother died in birth. And then, of course, you have the Black Death, which then comes. And he says regarding, I guess, the future, he says, "Though not a Phidian Minerva, as Cicero asserts, but a true portrait and likeness, such as it is my talent, if I ever shall be able to give it the last touches, that work, I say, when it reaches you, may set up without concern at the summit of whatever stronghold you please." And so this kind of work, the compilation of the Familiares, comes at the end of his life, and it's basically his touching kind of, I guess you could say, kind of memorial to himself and his friends, love for his friends, and despite the dangers of his life, the depressing natures of his life, to kind of pursue passion, really, and the passion that is, I guess, Cicero, really, in terms of Petrarch's life. But the question is, of course, obviously the main consideration of Petrarch in terms of historians and historiography is his Latin, and there's some really interesting things that can be used for Petrarch to understand and learn Latin, and I'll take you through a short phrase here to try to kind of, I guess, understand to try and understand the Latin and translate it yourself, so then you can also read Petrarch. So let's take this, which is about his early life, in which, like we say, his father takes his books and burns them. And so it begins with this, and it will come up on the screen. If you are listening to this on audio, then you might want to switch over if you are interested in learning Latin. So we begin here. "In eo studio Septimum totum peridi dicam verius quam exegi. So the first thing here to note is essentially word order. Now in English we work basically left to right. So the translation, which is I wasted 7 years in that study, when you read it left to right. Latin is very different. Latin does not have a word order. Many people will write it with a degree of order about it, but as we will see, this does not have word order. In eo studio septimum totum peridi. So studio means I study. That's a verb. We can see that's first, the o at the end. Other examples: teneo, moneo. If you see kind of an io, eo, whatever it may be for a verb, then that's kind of the first person. I study, first person present. So we know that then it's study. But although that's the third word in this Latin order, it's the 7th word in the English translation. This can make it difficult when obviously translating Latin, because you almost have to translate it all first and then redo it with the word order. So in eo, eo is a form of saying I, you, he, she, we, they. So obviously because it's connected with the studio, the eo with the io, we know that that's in relation. So we know it's I, first person. I, so-and-so, blah, 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 study. Then we have a number. We have septimium, which means 7, and totum means kind of a total. So we can say here the 7 years, essentially. A total of 7 years. Now, peridii, rather. Again, another verb, which we can see, just to kind of give you a hint, means waste. Now, it's actually wasted. The idea is that it is past tense. And of course, but we know it's first person of the past tense, so we can say it's I wasted. So I wasted 7 years in that study. So that's the first bit. In eo studio septemium totum peridi. I wasted 7 years in that study. Then we have dicam verius quam exegi. So dicam means to say, and it's again first person. It's first person of the future, so it's I will say. So we can pretty much start that off with I will say, and then we go on to verius, which means true. So we can kind of link that to nowadays. Verius, kind of verify, that kind of connection you can kind of see. So that means true. So then quam. Now quam means who or which, and that is kind of a very common Latin word that you can find. So it can mean, depending on the context, who or which, depending on if it's referring to kind of an inanimate object or a person. In this case, it's which, because it's referring to the study, the 7 years of study that was wasted. What is that? Let's see. Throughout. Oh yeah. Then we have exegi. Again, first person to mean kind of I spent. So when we stick that all together, we get dicam, I will say. Then we'll truly, I will say more truly than I spent. So dicam verius, I will say more truly. Quam, which I spent, than I spent. And then the exegi is the I spent part. So there we go. That kind of gives you, again, an idea of how we go. Now, I think it's worth, if we kind of take it down a bit to the a couple of lines down, here we go. Omnes quos habere potueram Ciceronis et simul aliquot poetarum libri. So this means all the books of Cicero and some of the books of the poets that some of the books of the poets. There we go. We just stopped there. So omnes means all. Obviously, many people might be familiar with the word omnibus, which means kind of. I mean, you typically get it with. I guess programs, for instance, you get like the omnibus of EastEnders, which is like all of the episodes. So it means all or whole. So all, and then we have quos. Quos, we had quam earlier, so this is just another form of quos, of quam rather. These, habere means you have. So we have all these you have. Potueram is pluperfect, first person, so it means to be able. So pluperfect means kind of were taken, had that I had were taken. It's kind of a version of the future. It's kind of a future past in a way. And then Ciceronis means Cicero. Et, and same in a couple of other languages. Simul, simul aliquot, several of the books. Aliquot being genitive, meaning of someone. It's kind of almost like an apostrophe. Poetarum, poets, and then libri, books, and then so then sticking that all together, if we go back, so omnes, that's nominative, all the books, because libri, although written at the end, actually goes almost at the beginning. All the books of Cicero, Ciceronis, genitive, et, and some of the books, aliquot poterarum libri, some of the books of the poets, we have genitive books, genitive poetarum, poets, and there we are, that were taken from their hiding places, were then burned. So I think that kind of gives you a good kind of look at Latin. It's a bit of a puzzle, but there are some really good study guides and things out there. Like I say, Petrarch isn't too complex, so if it's something that you were fancied diving into, then by all means you probably could, with a bit of practice. There's some obviously poetic nature about it, which can make it a bit difficult, but the more autobiographical stuff, easy. There we are. Thank you ever so much for watching. Have a good one, and see you next time.